And I'm really pleased to be here. And Dr. Williams is also, and we're going to try to demystify the MD PhD career.
Yes, hopefully it'll all be super clear when we're done. And like we said, let us know if you have questions and we'll, maybe take them along the way if it's really relevant to what we're talking about or save them for the end as well. All right, so we're going to talk about, what is an MD PhD program, first of all? Why might you even want to do this? And I think one thing that we really want to make clear is that people who go to school and get MD PhDs, the goal is that you're going to be biomedical scientists. You're going to use your experience as researchers to help understand and kind of find more solutions to treat patients and potentially, cure human disease in the future. And so that is the goal of our programs and of our graduates. That's what people who come to our programs are really excited about doing. So we think of MD PhDs as people that kind of live at the intersection of science and medicine. So we have this Venn diagram here with the idea that you get to really live in this middle space. You get to be people that are doing research in your lab. You're excited about the idea of discovery and research and finding these answers, but you also get to see patients in the clinic. And the really strong benefit of that is that you really get to see what are the problems in the clinic, what are the questions that we can't answer, what are the things that we really need to know in order to better help this group of patients that I'm seeing every week in the clinic. And how can we take those questions back into the lab and hopefully move that process forward? How can we understand this disease better or identify a better treatment or think of a better way to hopefully work towards a cure for these patients? And so you're really working at that space where you get to see patients, but you also get to then take that back and make progress in your research and help them. One phrase that I like is kind of the idea of, working to treat today's patients in the clinic and tomorrow's patients through your research. And that's the idea behind this. People that do pursue MD PhD are, really fascinated by human biology and disease. They're also creative. Science is something where you should have some creativity. You need to help come up with new ideas, new solutions to problems. And you should also be curious. You should want to know, how can we figure this out? There should be a curiosity in you that's driving you to do that science and that discovery. And then something that you should also be interested in, and you probably will learn from your prior research experience, is working on a project and getting excited by the idea of seeing that project to completion, of struggling when it's maybe not working out as how you want it to work, but if you keep working on it, you're gonna hopefully have good luck and it's gonna get there. But it's not always going to be easy, and so we like to see people who are willing to persist even when the science sometimes doesn't work the way that they want. So if you think, that sounds interesting, I think that's something that I could enjoy doing. How do I become an MD PhD? Where is this done? There are about 100 MD PhD programs across the country of various sizes that are affiliated with different medical schools. About half of those programs are supported by NIGMS or training grants from the NIH National Institute of Health. And those programs are known as medical scientist training programs. So you might see us use the term MD PhD program or MSTP somewhat interchangeably, and they really are essentially the same thing. It's just that programs that are referred to as MSTPs or medical scientist training programs have this grant from the NIH to help support their program. Most MD PhD programs will offer some sort of financial support. So you'll often get a stipend to help support your living expenses, as well as tuition covered for medical school and graduate school, and health insurance. And so those are some benefits that we are able to offer students in these programs as well. What does it look like? How do you complete these 2 degrees? And the goal is that you'll complete these in kind of an integrated fashion. And so it takes a little bit less time than if you were to do an MD and a PhD separately. And we're really training you for this special career as a physician scientist that's going to work in both of these areas. Typically at most medical schools, the first year or two, and this can definitely vary in what curriculums kind of look like. There's been a lot of changes in recent years, but usually the most year to year and a half to 2 years are going to be pretty much medical school. You might have a little bit of grad school worked in there where you do lab rotations. Maybe you do a little bit of a coursework to help you prepare for graduate school, but it's mostly going to be medical school. After that second year, then typically you'll go to graduate school. And here you're mostly going to work on your PhD research and take a few graduate courses. And this will often, on average, take about 4 years. It can vary. Sometimes it takes more or less, but typically 4 years. And then there's also often a little bit of medical school related things integrated. A lot of programs have something where you might go back into the clinic periodically so that you don't forget all of the clinical things that you learned in medical school and to help ease your transition back later. So there's sometimes something that you'll do for medical school as well. And then in the end of the program, your final year or two, depending on the school and the curriculum, you'll mostly be doing medical school, where you'll be finishing up medical school and applying to residency and helping decide what you want to do for that. So most of these programs will take about 7 to 8 years is kind of the typical design for completion, sometimes a little more, but usually they can be done in 7 to 8 years. And you can do a lot of different PhD fields. So as we mentioned in the beginning, pretty much anything in biomedical sciences is an option, but a lot of these programs will also have PhDs in some maybe more non-traditional fields. There are opportunities in sometimes humanities like sociology or anthropology, sometimes in public health, health policy, epidemiology, things like that. Something more like engineering or physics, different types of sciences that maybe you don't always associate as much with medicine. So there are a lot of options and a lot of different types of PhDs. And so that's something to think about if you have varied interests as you're considering these programs. What do MD PhD graduates do? So some of this slide and the next slide is actually a bunch of data that we got from surveying alumni across the country from all of our programs. So this is just, thousands of alumni from these many different programs. And they choose a variety of residency training specialties. So they go into many different areas within medicine. There are some that are more common than others, internal medicine or pediatrics, neurology, those are some common areas. But sometimes people will do other things, some different types of surgeries, subspecialties, or OB-GYN, or some things as well. And so there are a lot of options available. Typically, our graduates spend about more than 50% of their time doing research. In order to have an active, productive research career, they have to focus a lot on being able to write grants and to fund that and to train students and to work in that environment. And so they'll often spend more than 50% of their professional time on research so that they have that active, well-funded, productive research program to complement their clinical care. And so I think that's something just to be aware of if you are thinking about this, potentially interested, but you're a little bit on the fence about research. That can be an important factor for you to think about. This is something where you really want to be dedicated to the science as well as medicine. And also our graduates really enjoy their careers. About 80% of them said that they would choose to do this again, that they would absolutely pursue an MD PhD program again because they love what they do and they really appreciate the training that it's brought them. So I think that's something that's really important to think about as well. And so this is just also showing a little bit about what types of jobs our graduates have, what kinds of places they work in. And the majority of them do work in academia. So they work in places with medical schools and hospitals that are attached to a university. It's really common. But some of them also work in other places. They might work for institutes, some government types of things like the National Institute of Health or the CDC, or they might work in industry. There's some people that do industry. There's a small group that go into private practice, and I will say that this is not really the desired outcome for our programs. We're happy for people to pursue the careers that they want, but what we really hope is that you're using your training and combining your research and your clinical training, and you're working kind of at this edge where you're doing research and seeing patients. And so private practice really means you're mostly just seeing patients. And so that's something where there are some people that do that, but we really prefer where you're combining your research and clinical interests in the future. And then what types of research do they conduct? So there's a large group that do both basic science and translational research. And so that's probably what you often think of when you're kind of thinking about research. But there are some others that do more patient-oriented research or clinical trials. and others that do more public health focused research as well. And you can also see that these numbers, if you add them up, probably add up to more than 100%, right? So that means that there's many of our graduates that are doing research that cross some of these different areas and might have more than one of these different types of research going on as well. So it's a very flexible career. This is just one example of what this might look like. So this is Juanita Merchant, and Juanita Merchant, Dr. Merchant is a chief of Division of Gastroenterology at, I believe, University of Arizona Medical School. And she is a gastroenterologist, and she also studies something very related in her research. So she studies transcriptional control of gastroenterology peptides that regulate cell growth in cancer. So she is, likely seeing patients that are going to have cancers in various, colon cancer, various kind of GI systems. And she's then going back into her lab and she's specifically studying some of the things that help might control or cause those cancers. And this is a perfect example of how you can kind of meld your clinical and research interests. And I think this really highlights the power of this type of career. There are some people also that don't have always as related of research and patient care, and that's also okay too. So I don't want it to sound like you must do this. It really can vary. This is common, but sometimes they might be studying something that's really basic and not as related to their research. And that's okay too, or as related to their patients they see. So if you think to yourself, wow, this is something that I want to do, what are the steps to applying? How do I get there? We're going to try to cover a little bit of that here in these next few slides. So these are some of the things that programs will look for in applications. And I want to first just talk about this topic of holistic review and really point out the idea that as we're reading your application, we're considering all of these things in this slide and more. We're considering, all of your experiences, the things you've gone through, everything that you've done to prepare, and thinking about how that's going to help you prepare for a career and training as a physician scientist or an MD PhD student. And we do look holistically at your entire application. All of these factors matter. They're all important. And it's not that one is always more important than the other or something is less important. They're all things that we're going to consider. I will say probably the most important though is actually having research experience. And we're going to talk a little more about what we kind of like to see on the next slide, but you should absolutely have significant research experience so that we know and you know that this is a career that you are excited about, that you want to pursue, and you've had the experience to really make that decision. The other things that we'll look for are, do you know what a physician scientist really does? Do you understand what that career looks like? Do you know what maybe challenges might face you and you're really motivated and committed to pursuing that career as a physician scientist? And for some people, that means that they've been able to talk to a lot of physician scientists, they've been able to work with them. And for others, that's not always the case, and that's okay. You don't have to have always known a personal physician scientist, but there's a lot of ways, attending talks like this, finding information online, listening to people talk about their careers, where you can learn more about that. You are also going to medical school and you're going to be a doctor. So we also want to make sure that you have some experience in caring for others and that you know that that's something that you want to do. And this can also look different, and different programs might look at different things, but it might consist of shadowing, volunteering in clinical settings, other types of service that you might do to really show us that you understand what a physician does and that you want to work with and serve other people. We also will look at your academics. So that's going to include, of course, the courses you've taken to prepare in undergrad. We'll look at trends over time in GPA. Sometimes you start off, freshman year is challenging, and then as you adapt and you learn study skills, you might improve later on, or you might have a difficult semester because of personal circumstances, but that was just one bad semester, but you did well in the others. And so we'll certainly consider all those things as part of our holistic review. And you have to take the MCAT. Most programs just require the MCAT, although some PhD programs will sometimes require the GRE. It kind of depends. I think for most of them, the MCAT is the only one. But some of them, if you're applying in some of the less traditional options, there might be a requirement of a GRE. We'll also look at your life experiences, your activities, your involvement in your campus and your community. We really care that our students are people who have a lot of interests and passions, and they're going to bring those into our programs and our medical schools, and help maybe be leaders in our programs. Are going to help start new initiatives that are important, and they're going to be leaders then in their future careers as well. And so we'll look at the things you've done, your extracurricular activities, the things you've learned from the life experiences that you've had. And that's where the holistic review is really important, because these don't look the same for everybody, and they shouldn't. We want you absolutely to do things that you're interested in, to do the things that are important to you. And then we'll look at some qualities for our applicants, integrity, maturity, persistence, different types of things that we'll learn from you throughout your application and your interview, that we think are important characteristics for MD PhD graduates to have in the future. So I mentioned earlier that research experience is really important. So we always get this question, how much, actually, I'm going to go back before, I'll do this slide and talk about this. Sorry. How much research experience should I have? And there's no magic number. That's like one thing I'm going to say for all of these things. There's not a magic number of hours that if you hit that many hours, you're good. Or if you do that many projects or that many years, that's what you need. The point of doing this research experience is to understand what you're getting into. It's to know that you want to pursue this pathway in this career, and to help yourself say, yes, I love research and I want a career where I'm going to be doing research for, a large majority of my professional career and my research or my professional time. So in order to do that, you might have multiple summer research projects. You might have some undergraduate research. You might have a senior research thesis. And these types of things are things where typically you're going to be proposing a project or given a project, and you're going to be testing a hypothesis, and you're going to see if it works out, and you're going to go through that whole process, and it's probably not going to always work out. So you're going to have to go back and figure out what should you do differently, right? How to interpret it and how to move forward. And that's really what science is about. If you don't feel like you got this experience in undergrad, or you're just not sure if you're ready for MD PhD training and you need to take more time to decide, or you need more experience, that's when you might have people pursue research after graduation. So they might spend 1 or more years doing a post-bac or working as a full-time research assistant. This is not required. You don't have to take time off. If you had time to do this research in undergrad and you know this is what you want to do, great. No reason to pursue more research if you're ready to move on. But if you didn't, if that's not you, it's okay to take this time and really be sure that this is what you want to do. I think at our program, probably about 50 to 60% of our students take time off. That can vary from program to program. But like I said, it's not a requirement, not something you need to be doing if you've got that experience already. So what do the numbers look like? Nationally, across all of our programs and all of our years, we have about 5,500 trainees. And in the last year's application cycle, so the people who applied and entered kind of in the summer and fall of 2020, we don't yet have all these numbers for the people who will enter this summer because it's still kind of happening. We had 1,825 applicants for MD PhD programs, and you can compare that to more than 50,000 straight medical school applicants, so significantly less for MD PhD programs. On average, people submitted about 14 applications per applicant, so they applied to 14 different schools or programs. And then there were about 701 people who were accepted. And so that's roughly, maybe even a little bit better than a third of the applicants entered an MD PhD program. And this is actually pretty comparative to the number that end up going to straight MD in terms of the percent of total applicants. I think we sometimes get people who say that MD PhD programs are really like so much more competitive. You have a much less chance of getting in. And in terms of the number of applicants to the number of matriculants, it's actually quite similar for MD and MD PhD programs. And last year, this was really great. We had 51% of our matriculating students were women. I think this might be the first time that we've actually had more women than men, which is really exciting and something that we're excited about nationally. And then we also had about 13.5% to 14% of people who identify from underrepresented in medicine and science backgrounds. And then we also have a group of people who identify as being from multiracial or ethnic backgrounds. And so some of those might also be in underrepresented backgrounds, but the way that our data currently reports, we don't have unique numbers for these right now. These are numbers that are always each year going up, and these programs are working very hard to help diversify our programs and eventually the physician scientist workforce. And so we certainly, want there to be more underrepresented students in our programs. And this is kind of what the MCAT and the GPA of the applicant pool versus the matriculants looks like. And so you can see that the matriculants is definitely a bit higher than the applicant pool. But one point that we also just like to kind of mention is the range as well. So I think people often look at the average, and it's important, and you should definitely consider that if you're thinking about these programs. But you can see that people that are well below those averages do sometimes get accepted. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And that's where we'll look at your fantastic research experience and your other experiences that you've been involved in, and where that holistic review is really important as we're evaluating your applications. This is kind of the timeline of the application process. So one question that we get a lot that I meant to address earlier and didn't, but is the idea of COVID, right? So COVID certainly has impacted your ability to participate in research and clinical exposure and extracurricular activities. And we as programs definitely understand that. We realize that you might have had some virtual research projects last summer or throughout the school year, that your shadowing probably hasn't happened for a year because many of our campuses aren't allowing shadowing right now. And we understand that, and programs will certainly be flexible. But another thing that's really important to keep in mind is that this process of applying is a multi-year long preparation process. You shouldn't be getting all of your experiences over one academic year. You should be, spending a few years to help build your application and to really think about, is this what I want to do? Am I getting the experiences that I need? And so you're going to spend time, doing research, taking courses, getting some clinical exposure. That could be shadowing, it could be volunteering, it could be working as an EMT or a CNA. There's a lot of different ways that you can get those clinical exposures. And then you're going to be, working in campus and community activities and volunteering, and different things will be happening, during your life in this process. And we want to hear all about those things. One thing I think during COVID that's really exciting is we've also seen some students who will take advantage of opportunities that have arisen because of this. There are students who, last year when this happened, really found ways to be engaged in their community by making a bunch of masks, and maybe they didn't even know how to sew and they made cloth masks for people. Or I know someone who volunteered at a COVID testing site for a while and eventually was hired after being a volunteer. And so there's a lot of different ways that people can have kind of found ways to be engaged and involved and serve their community. And I think we love to see those types of things as well. So that really shows a lot about who you are when your regular experiences have kind of lost their opportunity. So in the winter and spring so if you're going to enter next summer, the winter and spring, which is essentially, a month ago or a lot more, you probably started preparing your application. You would apply this summer. In the fall of this year, you'd end up going on interviews, and then you'll hear about acceptances, hopefully in the winter. And then next summer, you would get to join a program. And so it is a long process, and it requires some perseverance throughout that. But we think that's important to just keep in mind of what this timeline looks like, so that you're setting yourself up for the best application that you can. I think I'm going to cut this slide maybe just a little short because I want to make sure we get to questions. But these are some topics that you might want to think about when you're choosing a program. What's it like at that program? Am I going to enjoy living there? What kinds of activities does the program do to help me? What are the students like? Do I fit in? What are their alumni doing? Is this just a place that I feel at home at? Do I feel like I'm going to be trained really well there? And at some point, it is going to be you getting to choose a program. I know at first it feels like you're just hoping to get in, but after you get multiple offers, multiple choices, you get to make these decisions. So I'm going to stop there. These are just some websites that have really great resources. So if you're considering this, I definitely recommend you to look those up. And then also find people around you, your mentors, and people like us, the program directors, students in programs, ask them questions, find out why they're doing this, and see if that's something that you might be interested in as well. Are there any questions? Is there anything that needs to be covered in the chat?
Maybe you can take the presentation off, Megan.
Yes, sorry. Excellent. All right, we can see your faces now.
Any specific questions?
May I ask?
So,
Let's go with Shelby.
Go, Shelby, please.
okay. So Megan, I was just wondering if you could explain more of what the PhD years look like. Is it just strictly doing research, or will you have lecture kind of mixed in, different courses?
Yeah, definitely. So I do not hear what you're saying right now.
Oh, Shelby, your mic is off.
I think.
There you go.
Would like a little more information on what the PhD years look like.
Sure. Yes, I can talk a bit more about that.
Thank you.
So basically, typically what happens in most programs, you spend about that first year in the PhD program where you're typically taking some courses. Now, it's not going to feel like undergrad where you are taking courses where it takes a lot of your day. It's less courses at a time usually. And they're also not as often lectures. Usually they're more interactive, they're more discussion based on literature. They're talking about designing experiments, setting up experiments, different kind of topics and theories of science. So you are in coursework that first year. Usually by the second year, you're done with coursework. Although I will say at our school, we do have maybe 2 PhD programs that require a little bit of coursework in that second year. But a lot of times you're not doing so many courses in that second year. And then the rest of that time you'll spend in research. So you might have that first year about half courses, half research. And then the second, third, and fourth years, it really is going to be mostly research. It almost feels like a job. Like you're going to lab every day and you're doing your research and trying to work on your research project. You often will write grants. That's something that a lot of students do, different training in that as well during that time.
When you start out, you're really starting out, you have to come up with a research project that you're going to do your dissertation research for. So what you're going to find that's really different between being an undergrad or a technician and being a graduate student is that there's a lot of thinking involved. And people are not telling you what to do, but they're asking you why you're doing what you're doing. So one of the differences in graduate school is that you really become an expert in a very specific area of research. And what you'll find is that, as Dr. Williams said, early on, you're going to take a few didactic courses that are related to your area of study, but then you're going to start reading about a topic that you really become interested in. And what you're going to find is that you're going to have to read a lot to be able to understand the topic so that you can ask a question. And the way you learn about it is you learn the technical aspects of your project first. And we like to think about that first part of graduate school as becoming technically competent in your field of study. And then once you've done that, you can start doing experiments, you can start asking questions, and you begin to develop a theme that your doctoral research is going to be involved. And then you're going to complete a set of experiments that are designed to answer a question in your field. When you finish it, you know more about that topic than anybody else in the world. And I'd say that's true for at least a month. It's really a cool feeling when you finish your dissertation research because you really are an expert in one particular area of research. And the reason you do that is that you really learn how to ask questions based upon your reading of the literature and work that's going on in other labs around you. So what we like to know when you do your research projects are not how many Western blots or PCR reactions you're doing, but what we would like to know is why are you doing those Western blots and PCR reactions? So it's a lot of why when you start doing research. Has anybody had a fun research experience yet?
I have. I worked with brain organoids, so very, very immature sort of model for the brain using stem cells. And I was studying jumping genes like transposons and their role in the brain and in development. And I found that, yeah, I generally enjoyed more general research questions. I know sometimes science can get so specified, but I was most excited when I was just generally trying to understand why these jumping genes move in certain disease contexts and like look at mechanisms. Yeah, so that was what I did.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Now, how did you apply that to a disease, or were you looking at a basic mechanism for how the nucleic acids interacted with each other?
So I did both. I studied it in a specific disease context. Rett syndrome. So it was on the autism spectrum disorders. And then I was also looking at mechanism because we were also developing like CRISPR probes to try to prevent them from jumping in the first place. And that was just in wild type cells. So if you have wild type cells and you remove jumping genes activity in general, what might that do to a wild type organoid? So I liked it when it was, sort of more general, I noticed.
Thank you. Brianna, are you there?
I am.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, and you?
I'm doing as great as you are, probably. What are you doing? Have you done any research yet?
No, I have not actually. I'm still completing my undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think you'll have time during your undergrad to do some research?
After hearing your guys' presentation, I'm considering it because honestly, I didn't know about all of this. So now that I know, I'm going to start looking into it.
So that's actually a good point, is that you really do want to find people that can give you more information on this. One of the things that we do have, we have a website that's part of the AAMC. If you type in AAMC MD PhD, you'll go right to our website, and it has a lot of really nice information about preparing to decide whether or not you want to be an MD PhD. I think one of the things that Dr. Williams talked about that was really important for the MD PhD part of this is that sometimes the MD part is pretty generic. You're going to become you'll study something in emergency medicine or internal medicine, but the PhD part of what you do will be very unique. And that's what you're trying to do with your research experiences, is try to figure out how you like to do research. So you want to find people that can help you think about that too. So you can have lots of lots of mentors along the way that can help guide you in these pathways. Hong, how are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. And just same as Brianna, I'm still undergraduate student, and just like what you share, I really care about getting a chance to join in any research project or having any mentor or coach, like any alumni or any professor who can guide or drive me to that part.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm looking to your website right now from the link that dropped in the chat.
Okay. Any other questions?
I had a couple, if that was all right. I was wondering, do all MD PhDs have to do residency, and is the residency the same as the MD residency for 4 years in hospital setting?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of them do residency because if you want to continue to see patients in your career, you have to do that, right? You have to finish your clinical training. And that's what a lot of graduates do. So I think, I don't remember the numbers, like 98%, it's very high, will end up doing a residency, but some people don't. Some people will say, I really decided I just want to do straight research, or somebody founded a company. Like there are some different things that people end up doing and end up not doing residency. But like I said, 98%, of our graduates or something like very high like that will do it. And it actually can look a little bit different sometimes than the straight clinical residency. And part of the reason is that some of these residency programs have kind of a research-based residency. And some straight MD applicants will do that too because they want to have more research involved in their career. But sometimes, like in internal medicine, for example, you normally do 3 years of residency and 2 years of a fellowship. And graduates who go into that from MD PhD programs can choose to join programs that have more research involved, and where they might do 2 years of clinical residency. And then they have an additional year that they can do more research training, kind of combine that with their fellowship. And so there are some of these residency programs that help you get more research training so that you're ready to join kind of the next phase of your career as well. And we certainly guide students, as they're approaching graduation, depending on what type of residency they're going into, what types of programs to be on the lookout, and which programs might have more research opportunities or less research opportunities for them during residency.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I have one more question, which is, should you have a really good idea of the field of research that you would like to be in as you're applying to MD PhD programs? And kind of along the same lines, do most people usually end up doing similar research once they finish the MD PhD program that they did in their PhD? Is it pretty like an extension of that, or is it sort of like you can switch fields?
Many switch fields, but many use the tools, very similar tools that they developed while they were in graduate school. So what you're doing in graduate school is you're really developing your scientific skills, how to read, how to think about projects, how to develop experiments, how to interpret your experimental data. It isn't until you get back into the clerkships that you really start trying to match your research with your clinical interests. And very often then things change, and they may change a couple times during your clerkships until you really find a career that matches your research with your clinical interests. And sometimes it doesn't happen specifically until you get deep into your residency. So we have a lot of students that come into these MD PhD programs convinced that they know the type of research that they want to do in the type of clinical program that they want to pursue. And I don't know, Megan, I would say at least half of our students end up either in a different PhD program or in a different clinical residency. You really do mature while you're going through your PhD and your MD training.
I think you also just, you learn so many more things. So we'll have students who will be doing some sort of research in undergrad that they think they're really interested in. And then in medical school, they learn, about topics that they just didn't even really know about, right? And so sometimes that will help shift and guide their interests earlier on as well. And one thing too, I want to mention your first question, do you need to be doing, what you're doing in undergrad? Is that what you need to be doing in your PhD, or do you have to really be sure? And that's not necessarily the case. It's more about having experience to know that you love research and you want to pursue that. We realize that sometimes you end up in a lab because you emailed 50 people that you were interested in and only one had space, right? Or you were a chemistry major and so you ended up doing chemistry research, but you really don't want to stay in chemistry going forward. You want to move to something more related to biomedical science. And we understand those types of things, and that's perfectly fine. Just explain those processes to us, how you chose your labs and how you ended up there and what you're interested in now and how your experiences have helped shape your interests.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you again for the presentation.
Was any other questions? So the key now is to find mentors, find people that can help you think about that know you and can help you think about the type of career that you want to pursue. And don't stop looking for mentors. It's really important that you find people that care about your future and can be honest with you about their impressions of you. And don't be afraid to drop a mentor if they're not helping you. So you can have multiple mentors, people that are helping you move forward in your career. And you may have one for a while and you may leave that mentor and then come back to that mentor. So it's one of those things where you're just looking for a lot of help. And I think that's one of the nice things about being in these MD PhD programs is that you have mentored experiences. All of your experiences you're doing are being mentored by people that are trying to help you figure out what you want to do as a scientist and what you want to do in your clinical career. And we talk about, should I do a residency? Or should I just want to do research? Why do I need to do a residency? And maybe an example of that is a colleague I have out at UCSD. And he was a biophysicist and he made magnets for imaging machines. And that's what his PhD was in. And he didn't think that he needed to get a residency. Because he just wanted to make magnets and make imaging machines more sensitive and more accurate. But he actually turned out to work in a radiology program, and it was helpful for him to have contact with patients so that he could develop studies to make these machines a little bit more accurate. And he's been doing it for many years now. So having a clinical interest sometimes helps you develop the patient population you might work on, or understand the diseases that you're working with from not just a research end, but from a clinical end. But there are a handful of individuals that don't do residencies and end up with pretty cool careers also.
That is very great advice. I just wanted to bring up because I guess I'm in that same dilemma too. Like when I talk to my parents and my mentors about it, most of my mentors are PhD holders. So they're like saying, why not just do PhD? But I wanted to do both. So I guess I asked in the chat, like, what was your experience before? Like, did you do a joint program or did you pursue, let's say, PhD first and then med school? How was your experience before?
I'm a PhD straight. So I made my decision early on that I didn't want to go to medical school, that I just wanted to do research. And then when I took my position at the Medical College of Wisconsin, I ended up in my first 12 years at the medical college, I graduated 4 MD PhD students, and each one was smarter than the next. And I
Wow.
got interested in the program, and I became an associate director. And I was an associate director for about 5 years. And then about 16 years ago, I took over the program at the medical college. And what I do is I train the students towards their PhD. I help them identify mentors and laboratories. And then I have 4 associate directors who are physician scientists who help the students identify, match their clinical interests with their research interests. So I work with the students early in their training towards their PhD, and then my colleagues work with the students a little bit later on. You know, the point is that this is a pretty unique career. There are 40,000 MD onlys every year going into medical school, and there are many more than that that are going towards PhD careers. But there are only about 700 students that self-identify themselves as being interested in pursuing MD PhD careers. So I didn't pursue it, I think, because I'm extremely linear in the way I work. I go from A to B, and I go there as carefully as I can. And I think the MD PhD tends to be a little bit more investigative than I am, and is also a little bit more inquisitive, and is able to integrate data really well. So it's that the people that are successful in these programs, they're incredibly curious, but on the other hand, they're very successful in developing experimental systems. So they have a little bit of a, it's interesting. I would, and Dr. Williams, you can attest to this. If you put 10 MDs, 10 PhDs, and 10 MD PhDs in the same room, and you talk to them for a half an hour, I think you could separate them into the 3 different groups of individuals. Those that are PhDs, those that are MDs, and those that are MD PhDs. But it is the point is that it is really a unique career. And if you're a really good scientist, but you need to see patients, you need to have a medical connection, that's when you should think about being a MD PhD. The reverse is not true. That if you want to be a physician and you sort of want to dabble in research, then you should be a physician. So the MD PhD is both a scientist and a clinician. And you know what's really fun is that they're really good at both. And what you'll find is that some of them will continue to see patients over their career, and others will take less of a patient load in their career, and others will take more of a patient load in their career, or they may become administrators, or they may become residency directors, or they may become clerkship directors, but they all contribute to these academic medical centers. Because as Dr. Williams said, about 70% of our graduates end up working in academic medical centers. So they become teachers, they become researchers, and they become clinicians. It's really a pretty unique career. So the question we have, is it right for you?
It's very fitting to the name of this discussion. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I was enlightened. Yeah.
All right. Hey, it was great
you.
meeting all of you.
Yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Okay. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.